of tonight is no endorsement, 26, Cyrus Vance 2, and Arthur Schwartz 1. So it's an official position of the club that we have not endorsed anyone for the race for district attorney. Okay, Jim.
Thank you. I don't know if I can get this all in a minute. For those of you who don't know me, I was a judge, Supreme Court judge for 19 years. I worked with the Assembly for about the same number of years. And I worked for Legal Aid Society before that.
Thank you.
Before that, I've got to say, Cyrus Vance has been an obstructionist and worked with the Republican Senate to stop almost every criminal justice reform that you care about. In the recent raise the age, he was the one who said, don't send cases right to family court and limit the number of cases that go there. On wrongful convictions, he's the one who says only use custodial, taping of custodial interrogations in limited number of cases and don't have consequences if the police don't follow the rules. On what they call the Brady Rule, and that is an obligation of a DA to turn over exculpatory evidence, and most wrongful convictions are a result of hidden evidence that's discovered later. He's the one who, I'm on the OCA, he opposed it. I'll come back, I'll speak forever on this.
All right. Theo.
Hi, my name is Theo Chino. I passed this paper earlier. I'm asking the club to vote a no endorsement on the DA of Cyrus Vance. The reason for that is simply because he wants our phone to be, he wants to create a backdoor. Last time at the VID club, he said that what he wants is to have a warrant for Apple to open the door. That is like asking permission. The problem is, criminals don't ask permission to steal your stuff from your phone. You lose your phone in the street, criminals will use the same tool that Apple has, the FBI has, to go through your phone and rampage your phone. So his excuse of asking permission puts every activist throughout the whole world in danger. Because maybe New York judges will issue warrants, but people around the world, autocrats, will not ask permission to go over their activist phone. So what happened here happened all over the world. Please vote no. Thank you.
Well said.
Tom.
I mean, last time when Cyrus Vance was running, he came to a lot of meetings and he was going to be very progressive. He said he was going to set up certain different courts for minor offenses, this and that. He had a good talk, but very little good came out of him. And I think he's a dangerous man. And I think he comes from a dangerous background. He's a very privileged person from the highest levels of society in New York City. His father was a big official, Cyrus Vance, the first one. He's the next one. I think he's been terrible. He's bad for poor people. He's bad for young people. He's bad for old people. In other words, he's bad.
Tony.
One of the things I feel very strongly about is wrongful convictions and clemencies, but especially wrongful convictions. And that's one of the reasons why I oppose the death penalty, is the wrongful conviction aspect of it. In Brooklyn, they set up a small unit, but a unit to deal with wrongful convictions, to go back and look at the convictions, use DNA and more modern techniques, and try to see if there's, to exculpate those people who were wrongly convicted. Cyrus Vance really doesn't do it to nearly the extent that they do it in Brooklyn. And Manhattan should be the most liberal borough. It should be the most progressive, the furthest advanced. And we have what's basically a conservative district attorney. And so I think we should send a message by voting no.
David.
So I guess I'm going to take the unpopular side. I'm just going to take the unpopular side of this. I mean, everything that's said I think is really valid, and I actually agree on the substantive positions that pretty much everyone's taken in terms of the bills that Cyrus pushed. I often don't support in terms of privacy, in terms of some other things. I just think that Cyrus is a very good district attorney. In terms of exculpatory things, one of the main reasons he doesn't do quite the extent of Brooklyn is that Brooklyn has a really, really bad, shady history and a really big backlog of really problematic convictions that aren't as bad as Manhattan. I think Cy's shown, I mean, if you compare the two, I'm not saying there are no problems in Manhattan. I think Cy's shown very good judgment in his prosecution, and I think that's something that doesn't come out in the papers, because if it comes out in the papers, that's when you've shown bad judgment. So while substantively I agree that a lot of things he's pushing aren't that good, the question is, what do you want in a prosecutor? I think you want a good judgment, and you think you want someone who runs a competent office as a prosecutor. And so that's why I endorse him. All the other good points brought against him.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Grace.
Okay. The reason I came here
Grace.
tonight is to specifically talk about Cyrus Vance Jr. and what he did to me as a fourth-generation New Yorker. He sent me to Rikers because my batterer up in Harlem was his confidential informant that helped him sweep through Harlem and make all those RICO gang conspiracies that put 14, 15, and 16 year olds in jail for 20 years for selling dime bags. Cy Vance does not want to be district attorney for his whole life. His daddy was Secretary of State. He wants to fulfill his daddy's shoes and fulfill the political efficacy of his father that his father had to forsake when he threw his body across the tracks of the Iran hostage situation. Why I went to Rikers Island? He tried to charge me with 324 counts of CPLR 240.30, which was a statute that said that any electronic communication that annoys or alarms the recipient is a criminal act. Think about the broad, police-stroked First Amendment impediment that was. Cy Vance used that statute to go after his political enemies. He went after poor Raphael Gohl, who, if you remember, was a studies scholar at Harvard. He went after all kinds of people to try and impinge their free speech. About a handout, because I'd really like you to know some of the evil that Cy Vance has been up to. He's the first one to bring Palantir digital technologies into New York City that allow law enforcement to go through every aspect of your digital life. I'm going to shut up, but if you'll please look at all of the different owners' things that Cy Vance has done as far as his judgment, putting a domestic violence survivor on Rikers Island and charging her with 324 counts of an unconstitutional statute so that he can make big gang busts in Harlem using a Crawford for batterer is against the...
Grace, thank you. 3 more minutes, if anyone would like to.
I could go on and on about political positions that he's
I'll take
taken,
a second.
but I'm not gonna do that. Instead, I'm gonna respond to two of the points that were raised, okay? His management style. I ran what was called a Tier 2 part, and that meant that I had hundreds of cases that would come in front of me. He is not personally involved. As Tony said, he's distant. He has 6 people who run their units below him, and they do whatever the heck he wants, and there's no unified policy. And as a judge, you're completely frustrated by the fact that there's one rule over it, depend on the luck of what DA happened to indict you, that's what happens. And with regard to what Tony talked about, the exculpatory units and everything, I handled a bunch of 440 units, which is the post-conviction relief habeas cases, and his unit comes in to defend the prior action. They pretend that they're doing a second look at whether or not there was a rightful conviction, but more often than not, they're covering their ass.
Thank you.
I will talk about something else I discovered about the DA. I read the Constitution of the State of New York. The DA's job is to prosecute people who are supposedly criminal. What I discovered that the DA did throughout this whole thing about encryption, about other things, was that the DA was trying to take the job of the mayor, to say what rule will take crime away from the city. That's not the job of the DA. That's the job of the elected official, of city council, of the mayor, to say what policy do we want for our city to be for New York City. And suddenly, by doing all these cyber crimes, cyber thieves, or what other group he's working on, he's suddenly taking the job of deciding how can we prevent crime. And that's not his job. That's the job of the NYPD. That's the job of the mayor. That's the job of city council. That's not for him to decide what do we want for our city as far as crime fighting. He is supposed to fight the crime when he gets to court. Thank you very much.
Well said.
May I give you a little background to the very thoughtful question by the gentleman? You and I live our lives today probably on smartphones. We don't take paper notes. We communicate by smartphones. Indeed, these phones have revolutionized our lives in a really powerful and positive way. Do we all agree on that? Okay, no one shaking head. I'll tell you whose lives it has also revolutionized. It's the criminals. Because the criminals use their cell phones, just like you and I use these cell phones, to talk to each other, to text each other, to send messages and pictures to each other. And it can be cases involving child sex abuse, it could be cybercrime, it could be terrorism. And so they're doing just what you and I are doing. They're using their cell phones for all purposes. Now, the U.S. federal government, in its dealing with the NSA, and you heard this through the Snowden revelations, there was great upset and anger about the federal government snooping into people's electronic communications. And as a consequence of that, Apple, an amazing company, and Google, an amazing company, decided that they really wanted to get away from the toxicity of any working relationship with the government in response to requests by law enforcement for information. And so what they decided to do was to redesign their cell phones. They redesigned their cell phones so that law enforcement, myself, FBI, even when they had a search warrant authorized by a judge, which means I went to a judge and I said, I believe there's evidence in this case about rape, robbery, murder, identity theft, and here's why, and the judge agreed with me, they engineered their phones so they could no longer open phones themselves. Now, let me tell you the consequence of that decision. I have 535 phones in my office of cases involving rape, robbery, murder, terrorism, terrorism finance, child abuse, and economic crime that I can't access. The people who are affected by my inability to access those phones are victims of child abuse, rape, robbery, terrorism, and the like. So I believe passionately that we should have our privacy. I also believe that that doesn't mean that we should live in a world of anonymity, where if you are engaged in criminal conduct, that you can do that, and that there's no power of the government or the courts. Put aside the government, the courts. Access to critical evidence that will protect the rights of victims. So, my stance has only become more clear as I've seen the problem grow bigger and bigger in my own office. And let me tell you this, we talk about this issue mostly reading about it when we think of San Bernardino, terrorism. And our office does terrorism cases, and our cases are affected by encryption. But the biggest impact of this encryption is not going to be in the federal cases, but in our state courts, who handle 95% of the cases in the country. So it is those state court crimes, the very, very personal crimes of sex crimes, crimes of violence, theft from seniors, cybercrime. These are the cases that we can no longer get access to information to because the companies have re-engineered the devices specifically for the purpose so that we cannot get access. I don't call this a backdoor, sir. We were only able to access these devices by getting a search warrant, historically, and then sending the device back to Apple with a search warrant, and they would open the device themselves and get the information that was requested and send it back to us. Now, you may call that a backdoor, but I certainly don't. I call it a court-ordered search warrant, and the phone was sent back to the company to get what was relevant and responsive from the phone.